Welcome to the digital lecture series of FU Best, the European Studies program of Freie Universität, Berlin. In 15 sessions, we will offer you a broad overview of FU Best academic course offerings. You can choose from 12 subject course lectures representing a wide range of disciplines and 3 live sessions on German language and culture. Our series is divided into 4 themes relevant to European studies in Berlin and Germany today. Each will be dealt with by a group of FU Best instructors from the perspectives of their particular disciplines or German language levels. Part 2 explores a range of concurrent national and personal identities in present-day Europe, Germany and Berlin. We will look at Germany's political role or roles in Europe, the interplay of religion and of popular culture with the identities of specific groups of Germans, and the meaning of art for the creation of a national identity in Europe. All sessions will offer you insights into our instructors' semester-long regular courses within the FU Best program and the way in which they integrate Berlin as a cultural and historical location. We hope you enjoy the online program we've assembled for you. For more details about the lecture series and our regular on-site FU Best program, visit our website later. You will also find additional information at the end of today's lecture. With that, enjoy the following session and see you soon in Berlin.
Hello and welcome to my today's lecture. My name is Karolina Golimowska and I've taught here at FU Best since 2016. I am also involved in the sister program, the International Summer and Winter University here at the Freie University in Berlin, and there I give a course called Popular Culture, Berlin and Beyond. I hold a PhD in American Studies from Universität to Berlin, and I taught a wide range of seminars and workshops for BA and also MA students at University in Berlin, but also as a visiting scholar at the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia, and as a lecturer of the Fulbright Summer School several times. I also spent some time as a visiting scholar at the New York University in New York in 2014. And here with FU Best, I teach a course called Pop Culture European American Trends. And what we do in this class is we learn about the history of popular culture and the mutual influences between the US American and the European representations. And we also learn how to apply theoretical concepts from both sides of the Atlantic to cultural practices of a given time. So we work with a wide range of theoretical texts and concepts by European and American sociologists, philosophers, theoreticians from other disciplines, and we try to apply them to the cultural representations of a given time that we discuss in class. And we discuss a wide range of representations, which is supposed to allow to establish a cross-disciplinary perspective and connection between these representations, and also to trace national and international tendencies. The spectrum of the course encourages to think outside of a single discipline and to see links between movements, trends, and ideologies. And wherever we can in this course, we look outside of the window from the university building and have a closer look at the city of Berlin. And wherever we can, we provide references from the city to what we were talking about. So we look at Berlin as a setting of popular culture practices and phenomena, as well as a protagonist and source of inspiration for these particular popular culture practices and representations. In order to put my today's lecture in the context of the course that I teach, I would like to make 2 points. So My today's lecture is entitled Young Culture, Hip-Hop and Street Art as Expressions of Youth Identity in Germany. And it consists of two aspects that we deal with extensively as part of the course, namely the culture of hip-hop. There is one session devoted entirely to the history of hip-hop, to seeing hip-hop as a local movement that started in New York City in the 1970s as a form of a protest against social inequalities. And we have a closer look at how this very local experience and movement changed and turned to become a global phenomenon of popular culture. And here we use two texts as a starting point for our discussion and a departure to further elaborations on the culture of hip-hop, namely Trisha Rose's A Style Nobody Can Deal With, Politics, Style, and the Post-Industrial City in Hip-Hop, and Simon Strick's article entitled Competent Crowds, Following the Cultural Translations of Hip-Hop to Germany. I will also be referring a lot to these two texts as point of references in my talk. And a second aspect of my today's presentation is street art and its various representations and facets. That is linked to a different course unit. Namely, there is one block within the course within which we discuss different forms of cities and urban appropriation practices in the United States and in Europe through street artists. We discuss different concepts of placemaking, the distinction between space and place within a given urban concept and setting. And here, the text that I will be referring to today and that we take as a point of departure to our discussions in class is an article by Luca Visconti and his scholarly group, Street Art, Sweet Art, Reclaiming the Public in Public Place. So this is my theoretical framework for today's talk. If you are interested to find out more, have a closer look into these texts. So my today's lecture will be structured in the following way. I will start by providing some information about the beginnings of hip-hop in the 1970s in New York City. Here I will be referring a lot to Trisha Rose's text that I just mentioned. I will present this very first idea of a hip-hop as a lifestyle, as a hybrid form of cultural representations. I will also link it to street art as we're going to find out the first hip-hop artists and the first hip-hoppers were not only rappers, but they were also breakdancers and street artists. Sprayers, graffiti artists. So that will be the beginning. I will then talk about the way the hip-hop culture entered Germany in the early 1980s, and I will show some examples of the attempts of a cultural translation, as Simon Strick calls it, in these early days of hip-hop in Germany. We will listen to some examples, and we can then, where everybody can judge for themselves whether these attempts can be considered successful or not, these first ones. I will then talk briefly about the history of German hip-hop, of the so-called new wave within the movement from the 1990s through the 2000s and also up to today. And I will end my talk in Berlin, so I will talk about local identity formations on the example of two Berlin-based artist groups, namely UFO 361 and PHZ. and I will link it also to street art, as UFO 361 was also at the beginning of his career a sprayer, a graffiti sprayer. So I will try to link this to the presence and the importance of street art in Berlin, and the attempts or the political attitude of the city towards street artists. But that will be just a brief mention. So talking about the origins of hip-hop, it's important to start with presenting the entire social and economic setting thereof, namely New York City in the 1970s. Trisha Rose states in her article that further movements were to be noticed on the West Coast, mostly in LA, but for the purposes of this talk, I will concentrate only on the East Coast and talk about New York City, and specifically about parts of the Bronx, namely South Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn. Identity in these early hip-hop days is very much rooted in the local experience. So New York City is facing a massive housing crisis caused by gentrification that's ongoing at that point already. There are massive social inequalities, and all of this is linked, according to Trisha Rose, to the deindustrialization of the city that is going on at the time. So factories are closing, the grounds are being sold, new businesses open, the industrial part of the city life is vanishing, people lose their jobs. This causes a massive relocation within the boroughs of New York City, and a strong social inequality between the groups living in New York City at the time. And according to Trisha Rose, the groups that were hit most by these painful transitions were Hispanic, Black, and Jewish communities. So we observe how the hip-hop movement develops out of this very specific New York City context at the time, and is a form of protest against these social inequalities, a form of expression that allows others insights to these communities that are suffering from all these inequalities, relocations, etc. Trisha Rose talks about hip-hop being an Afro-diasporic cultural form, and also a source of an alternative identity formation. She also talks about the so-called internal cross-fertilization, so a certain hybridity within the movement. So it's hip-hop movement at the beginning is a very interdisciplinary way of expressing yourself. We have rap music, ghetto blasters, break dancing everywhere in the city or in these areas, and there's also graffiti writing, spraying, and there's also fashion that is linked to it, and that has very much that has a lot to do with identification and how you could be recognized as a member of a particular group through what you were wearing. So all this plays an important role. And also the fact that there is a symbolic appropriation of urban space that happens as part of these expressions. So we have a culture of sampling, attitude, and dance, and all of this uses the city as a stage. So breakdancers are to be seen on the streets, in the subway stations, etc. Different parts of the city become stages. So it's a very urban culture, a very urban movement, very much linked to the local circumstances. A part of the stylized graffiti writing is tagging, which is directly linked to a form of claiming a territory, a space, and inscribing this identity on public property. Linked to this entire crisis in New York City at the time is, of course, politics of President Gerald Ford, who in 1975 vetoed a request for a federal bailout to prevent New York City from economic and social crisis. So all of this is obviously linked to one another. One of the reasons for this massive relocation of the population of New York City is the Cross-Bronx Expressway, designed and planned by the urban city planner Robert Moses. Beginnings of that expressway are dated, that these are late 1950s, so 1959. The expressway started to be built, and this requires massive relocation of population living in the South Bronx mostly, so where this expressway is supposed to pass through. And just for us to have a little bit of a local context, so this is New York City with its 5 boroughs, and we can see at the very top, so in the north, the Bronx, and the Cross-Bronx Expressway cut, literally, this is the red line on the map that you can see here, cut right through the very densely populated area of New York City, causing the necessity for people to move out of their houses because they were torn down partly, etc. And all of this has a very strong impact of the local communities who are who feel treated in a very unfair manner, who feel that their desires and necessities are being ignored. This causes anger within these communities. The project has been criticized largely, of course, also at the time. Nevertheless, it was realized the way I just showed to you. So what happens is the first so-called block parties are being organized. Here, worth mentioning is DJ Kool Hertz of Jamaican origins, who starts organizing the first block parties in the Bronx. He plays, during these parties, he plays only excerpts from songs, so it's beginning of sampling in this way. Plus there is an MC who encourages people with words to participate, to dance, to be there. And all of this raises from this social concept and the social situation that I just described. What is interesting and what Trisha Rose points out in her article is that the first hip-hoppers were people trained in jobs that were no longer significant at the time in this post-industrial New York City. So, for example, DJ Kool Hertz, whom I just mentioned, attended an auto mechanic trade school. Grandmaster Flash, originally from Barbados, another DJ from the very first hip-hop area, learned how to repair electronic equipment. So all of this all of a sudden doesn't seem relevant. These people lose their jobs, or even their jobs cease to exist. And right, this is what happens. Trisha Rose also points out, and I'm going to return to the previous slide, that the practice of self-naming of the first of the hip-hop artists of the first era has very much, or has a lot to do with this situation. So these names consist either of some technical names and some form of a mastery, or they provide a social criticism. So we have this fusion of technology and mastery, or general coolness. Here we have Terminator X, LL Cool J, which stands for Ladies Love Cool James, Hurricane Gloria, Cool Moe D, Kid and Play, Salt and Pepper, Queen Latifah, etc. And just to mention one that provides this social criticism very much in your face, that's NWA, of course. So this is what is happening in New York City at the time. And the question now is, how to translate this this very specific cultural form that Trisha Rose calls Black urban renewal into something that could be universal, or that could be understood elsewhere in a different social and political context, in a different country. What to do with this, how to make it available, how to make it accessible. In the course on popular culture, we talk about access as one of the main aspects of how something can become popular, and how granting access is the way to go if you want to become part of popular culture. So what is happening is from this performative culture, very much linked to New York City, from this life experience of witnessing a block party in the South Bronx, or from being a part of a breakdance performance, or being confronted with street art, graffiti, tags, etc. in the given place. It's the music, it's the technique of rapping that seems to be the easiest to be carried over to another cultural setting, to another, to become something of a global interest. Therefore, oftentimes when we now speak about hip hop, we mean just obviously in quotation marks, just the just this part, the rapping part of the entire culture, which at its beginnings was much, much richer and much more interdisciplinary. So, according to Simon Strick, the first hip-hop artists in Germany where rap as part of this hip-hop culture started to be available and started to enter the German market in the early 1980s. So the first hip-hop artists in Germany were not participants, because there was nothing performative about the hip-hop, the rap culture that entered Germany, but they were the audience. And what happens is an attempt at mediating the cultural translation, as Simon Strick calls it, of this rap music to Germany and to the German context. So we have this clear movement from local to global. It turns out that the language is very important, which is not surprising. So a whole group of early hip-hop artists in Germany tried to rap in English, and it took a while for the entire scene to develop and to find their own ways of expression, mostly then in German, which means that German hip-hop is mostly to be heard in Germany because it's so important to understand the lyrics. But it seems that there is no desire to become part of global hip-hop culture. It's more important to manifest certain needs, opinions, etc. in Germany, within Germany. And I would claim that this applies to all hip-hop cultures in Europe. So wherever we look, whether it's French hip-hop or whether we look to Eastern Europe, whether it's Polish or Czech hip-hop, it would be concerned with social inequalities, with what is happening in the given country, and it would address these issues in the local language, addressing these local problems and making them available for countrywide for the local audience. So in New York City, after everything I've described, this performative aspect of the hip-hop culture, its different forms, the hybridity, all of this is very much linked to this personal experience rooted and based in the city. But at some point, there is an interest to make it available to larger crowds and to record it. So the first ever release rap record, according to Simon Strick, but also to other sources, is Rapper's Delight, recorded in 1979 by Sugarhill Gang, a group of rappers put together in a kind of an artificial way by the record studio, And you will see, we will listen to a little excerpt of this song. You will see that it seems that that there, at this point in 1979, there aren't proper means to transport this entire really deep and multifaceted culture into a recording studio. So this Rapper's Delight uses the background music or the music from Good Times, and we're going to listen to this right now.
Here's Wonder Mike, Hank, and Master G, the Sugarhill Gang.
The hip, how you don't stop. You rock it out, baby, rubber to the boogity bang bang, the boogie to the boogity beat. Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see, I am Wonder Mike, and I like to say hello. Up to the black, to the white, the red, and the brown, the purple, and yellow. But first...
So as you could just hear, we have some party rhymes that are being performed to an instrumental version of the Good Times. And it really has little to do with the social inequalities, the protest against what was happening in New York at the time. So there is a discrepancy in between the performative culture and the beginnings in the post-industrial New York City and the very first hip-hop records. We also had Run DMC and Public Enemy as the very first recorded attempts. And as Simon Strick points out, even though rap has always been somehow a global music because its formation included diverse cultural influences, and it started to function as a common means of expression for people all around the world at some point, this global success seems to be an act of treason or betrayal, because first of all, because it's separating rap from the other means of expression that were originally included in hip-hop, in the hip-hop culture, the other practices. Second of all, because the performative aspect of being there and seeing everything live and experiencing it live is no longer valid or no longer there. And also because of the fact that something becomes popular that started as a very local and very important socially movement, also this can be considered as a form of betrayal thereof, so of this very locally important movement. 1980, the first ever recorded rap in Germany, plays with the idea of a cultural translation and uses exactly the same track of Good Times. It is being performed by a band called GLS, Gottschalk, Laufenberg, and Sechshauer, so three men who try to do hip-hop in German. And we're going to listen to this attempt. It might seem funny to you, but it's important to see how engaged they are with the technique that is very new at the German market at the time, and it generally is quite new. So we're going to listen to this now.
Sag mal hip hop, the hip, the hip, the hip, hip hop with the beat. Und nun hip hop, the hip, the hip, the hip, hip hop with the beat.
Hey, es ist schon lange her, ich weiß gar nicht mehr, wie es so richtig begann. Es war die Beatles-Zeit, der Mersey-Sound, den ich einfach super fand.
Die Fortunes spielten im Storyville, die Beatles im Top 10. Die Stones, die Shadows, die Kings, die Who, die waren unerhört in. Zum Starclub fuhren wir, waren ganz irr, wenn doch mal richtig was lief.
So it seems that the very first attempts to bring rap and the hip-hop culture to Germany are of a technical nature. So it's the technique that is being fascinating and that different artists try to play with. We have the movement in music called Neue Deutsche Welle, so the new German wave, that uses this way of talking or talk singing in German called Sprechgesang. These are people like Nina Hagen at the beginning of these influences in Germany. But it takes a while for the music scene in Germany to find out how to deal with these techniques and what to do with them in order for them to become relevant and important. We also have one of the very first bands is die Fantastischen Vier, so the Fantastic Four, who also play with the notions of the different techniques at the beginning without really engaging in the historical importance of the movement. Right. But it takes a while. It takes about a decade for the German music scene to find its own ways of expression using hip hop and to find its character. That it then turns out does not necessarily have to have anything to do with the American origins. That it might be better to adapt these techniques to rap and talk and express what is happening here in Germany, or most importantly, or in the most examples, more locally. So what we see in the early 90s is the beginning of the so-called new school of hip hop, and there are certain geographical centers that I tried to establish here. So we have die Fantastischen Vier, the Fantastic Four, in Stuttgart, who in 1991 released Jetzt geht's ab, a first record that where hip hop is used, or where rap is used in German in order to address local problems. We have the second center in Heidelberg, where DJ Torch is active, and his formation Advanced Chemistry. They have an LP released in 1992 called Fremd im eigenen Land, so Stranger in One's Own Country, that addresses problems of migration, that addresses problems of integration within the German society. We're going to listen to this.
Gestatten Sie, mein Name ist Frederik Hahn. Ich wurde hier geboren, aber wahrscheinlich sieht man es mir nicht an. Ich bin kein Ausländer, auslänender Tourist, Immigrant, sondern deutscher Staatsbürger und komme zufällig aus diesem Land. Wo ist das Problem? Jeder soll gehen, wohin er mag. Zum Skifahren in die Schweiz, als Tourist nach Prag, zum Studieren nach Wien, als Au-pair nach Paris. Den andere wollen ihr Land gar nicht verlassen, doch sie müssen fliehen. Ausländerfeindlichkeit, komplex der Minderwertigkeit. Ich will schockieren und provozieren, meine Brüder und Schwestern wieder neu motivieren. Ich hab schon einen Plan, und wenn es drauf ankommt, kämpfe ich Auge um Auge, Zahn um Zahn. Ich hoffe, die Rat.
And so here you can clearly hear a form of a protest. You can hear anger that is rooted in the very German experience of being foreign, of being a foreigner, of being a stranger to the society, of having difficulties in becoming accepted, etc. So all of a sudden, this rap, very much rooted in the German experience, becomes important and transmits contents that are eye-opening for people coming from other milieus, coming from other social circumstances, groups, and contexts. As a third center, I identified Hamburg in my research, a very important center of hip-hop in the 1990s, from the beginning of the decade up to late 1990s, and also later on up to this day, is Hamburg a very important place in Germany for hip-hop artists. We have in the 90s formations like 1-2, 5 Sterne Deluxe, Dynamite Deluxe, Fettes Brot, and we also have the absoluten Beginner, who very much, all of the mentioned artists, very much talk about the very local experience of being in Hamburg, of being in a city that's close, that has a port that is close to the world because of the history of the harbor, etc. And we're going to listen to City Blues. And I'm providing my own translation of the lyrics into English, just to give you an idea. this is Hamburg, where the sun doesn't shine. No, it's pissing down again. As always, here come the beginner to rap about their lives in rain. Where you are, south of the river Elbe, life is a different terrain. So let's listen to a little bit of this.
Das ist Hamburg, und die Sonne scheint nicht. Nein, es ist wie immer. Hier sind die Beginner, erzählen aus ihrem Leben im Regen. Wenn man euch im Süden von der Elbe, da ist das Leben nicht dasselbe.
Hip-hop becomes a way to address very local identities that are not interchangeable, that are very much rooted to a specific experience within a specific social group and context. In 2001, Sami Deluxe, also based in Hamburg, releases a track called Weck mich auf, so Wake Me Up, which, if you analyze the lyrics, clearly is a generation manifesto. It could, when I read it first, you could even have associations with Ginsberg's Howl, the general miserable state of the generation and lacks of perspectives, etc. All of this is being addressed here. I'm providing again my own translation of a passage. Please wake me up from this nightmare. People can hardly see the forest from within the trees. They keep trying to make me believe that it is possible to live here freely. So that was something that also clearly shows how hip-hop is used to provide access to problems of a particular social group. And in this case, a generation. In the year 2000, an association called Brothers Keepers is being established, among others by the DJs that I already mentioned here, Deutsch and D-Flame, in reaction to the brutal death of Alberto Adriano, who was killed by right-wing extremists in Dessau. And this Brothers Keepers also functions as a label and releases a song called Adriano Letzte Warnung in 2001, which is a clear protest against racism in Germany, against violence in general, and that clearly refers to this killing of Alberto Adriano, who was an immigrant from Mozambique, and who was killed for clearly racist purposes.
Jetzt ist die Zeit, hier ist der Ort. Yeah, heute ist die Nacht. Torch, Mann hat das Wort, denk ich an Deutschland. In der Nacht bin ich meinen Schlaf gebracht. Mein Bruder Adriano wurde umgebracht. Hautfarbe schwarz, Blutrot, Schweigen ist Gold. Gedanken sind tiefblau, ein Bürger Angst vor seinem Volk. Ein Wintermärchen aus Deutschland. Blauer Sand als Kind schon erkannt, hier bin ich fremd im eigenen Land. Operation Artikel 3, da habt ihr gelacht. Jungs, das ist mein Leben, das haben wir uns nicht ausgedacht. In all den Jahren, in denen wir Airplay verschwendet haben.
So here again, this form of manifestation of anger uses hip-hop to as a form of expression in a politically relevant and important situation. That was the killing of Alberto Adriano in 2000. So you can see that hip-hop develops, the culture of hip-hop develops in Germany, that it becomes to address local problems and issues, so that it draws from the New York origins of the hip-hop culture in an abstract sense. So it's no longer so important to stick to the techniques, it's more important to find your own voice, to, similarly to the first hip-hoppers in the United States, talk about problematic issues and have a voice in the public discourse on matters which are important for the society. In 2004, Berlin-based artist Sido releases a song called Mein Block, which refers to a very local identity of Sido living in Berlin in a big block of flats and the entire setting around it. And this is, it seems, where the culture of hip-hop becomes so important in Berlin, which, as you saw in my previous slide, was not listed among the centers of hip-hop culture in the beginning of the movement in Germany. So here Berlin becomes important, and we're going to listen to Mein Block now. The song, the lyrics address the local area and all the social problems related to it, and it also, the singer, the I, claims ownership of a certain parts of the city. So this is also an important aspect. And in order to bring us closer to contemporary hip-hop scene, I decided to choose 2 examples from Berlin. As I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, I try to use Berlin whenever I can in the class devoted to popular culture. So I chose 2 artists, UFO 361. The proper name of the hip-hopper is Ufuk Bayraktar, and he has Turkish origins. And he started also as an active graffiti sprayer within the THC crew that is still active in Berlin, and that was, among others, popular or famous or infamous, depending on how you want to see it, due to spraying on subway trains in Berlin. Obviously a very illegal activity. So this is an example of an artist who tried to live the hip-hop culture with its hybridities and with its multifaceted aspects. So he was not only a rapper at the beginning of his career, but also a sprayer. Right now he mostly is a rapper due to the legal issues linked to graffiti, to the form of graffiti. So, UFO 361, the name refers to the part of Berlin called Kreuzberg in Central South, and this district, or this part of city, used to be divided into 2 parts, and these parts had numbers. The first part was called Kreuzberg 36, and the other one Kreuzberg 61. So the name plays with these numbers. This was the division of the city, the administrational division and numbering of the city from the times before the wall came down. So there's a historical aspect in this name. And in 2005 he released the song Ich bin ein Berliner, which obviously refers to the speech of JFK when he visited Berlin, and as you will see in the clip, a mask of JFK is being worn by one of the artists. So it clearly is referring to the history of Berlin here as well.
Ich guck auf den Boden. Und wenn's dir nicht passt, bist du nicht aus der Stadt. Hier sind viele auf Drogen. Die Hälfte auf Tasche und die Hälfte im Knast. Ja, sie wollen meine Strophen. Die Hater auf Hass und die Bitches gehen ab. Wenn das, was wir wollen, jemand anderes hat. In Kreuzberg geboren. Zwischen Dealern und Zombies auf Schore. Warum keiner lacht, denn sie wollen dich bedrohen. Unterwegs in der Nacht, immer wach ist der Magen nicht satt. Ja, dann wird hier gestohlen.
So alone the clip is very, provides a sense of a complete unease. There are guns in it, there's violence indicated, and this a mask of JFK that is being worn. This is all a very strange and unpleasant setting to be confronted with. But then, on the other hand, it does something with you as a listener, as the audience. It is powerful. In the form of the expression that it chooses. A second hip-hop formation that I wanted to mention here, that is also Berlin-based, is BHZ, that stands for Banana Haze, similarly to what Trisha Rose claims about the names or the self-naming practice in New York at the beginning of the hip-hop culture. Also in Germany, self-naming is very prominent and very important throughout the entire hip-hop scene. What is specific to the German language and to the German names and then self-naming practices is the usage of abbreviation. So German tends to have these really large words, the so-called Komposita, that consist of various nouns, sometimes nouns and adjectives, and that needs to be abbreviated in order for people to be able to use them in a fast manner. So there you go, BHZ, Banana Haze, a band from a hip-hop formation from Schöneberg, which is also part of Berlin, not far from Kreuzberg, where we just met before 316. And I would like to show you, that would be the very last clip of this talk, a part of a single release from the newest album called Kiezromantik, which means the local district romanticism. And the piece is called Flasche Luft, so a bottle of air, but Luft could also refer to a liquor which is called Berliner Luft and is peppermint liquor. I'm quoting again my own translation: drinking a bottle of air on the subway, steep walk with the brothers and sisters, all is well, hope that nothing changes. We're loitering on the streets, but we're no gangsters. And here comes Flasche Luft.
Ja. Trink ne Flasche Luft in der S-Bahn. Steigang mit den Brüdern und den Schwestern. Alles ist gut, hoffe, dass sich nichts verändert. Bildungen auf Straße, aber wir sind keine Gangster. Trink ne Flasche Luft in der S-Bahn. Steigang mit den Brüdern und den Schwestern. Alles ist gut, hoffe, dass sich nichts verändert. Bildungen auf Straße, aber wir sind keine Gangster. Der Mondschein, Teil über Berlin. Gehe raus, bleib wie meine Nikes niemals clean. 5 Tage die Woche, mein Körper sagt zu viel. Trinke Bier zum Kontern, nein, ich brauch kein Aspirin.
The way the clip uses Berlin as the stage, so you can see parts of the streets of Berlin. You can see there's a shoot taken outside of the train station, Berlin-Schöneberg. So this is very much linked to this local identity of being from here, being from Schöneberg, not even being from Berlin, not to mention being from Germany, but this very, very local aspect of your identity linked to this territorially very small area. I would like to finish with briefly linking the German hip-hop culture that, as I stated, is mostly based on rap, to some forms of street art that are practiced by some of the rappers. And I would like to refer to the article by Visconti and others that we also discuss in class, and where the most important aspects of talking about street art is the distinction between what is public and what is private within a normally urban setting, and how a certain claiming or reclaiming of public space is at work there. So Visconti identifies various ways of street art interventions in an urban environment. These are tags, so the culture of tagging that I mentioned when referring to the hip-hop culture, also in New York at the beginnings. So highly stylized writing, which, well, the difference between tags and highly stylized writing is sometimes blurry because tags use stylized writing, but tags are mainly to sign, to mark a particular place with a signature that refers to a group, to a gang, to a band. Then we have sticking, stenciling, and poetic assault. And I won't have the time to talk on detail about all of these forms of urban interventions within street art, but just for you to keep in mind that there are many ways of practicing street art. In class, we discuss poetic assault a lot and talk about concrete poetry and other poetic interventions also in the study of Berlin. But here and for now, I wanted to concentrate mostly on tags, as they are linked to the hip-hop culture and to graffiti in general. And as I already mentioned, some of the artists, rappers that I talked about, DJ Torch, but also UFO 361, also in their activities combined or used street art as a way of communicating with the public, as a way of forming the public discourse. So this is all there. And I warmly invite you to have a look at the webpage berlingraffiti.de to have a look at different forms of street art conducted by the THC crew that UFO 361 belonged to. You can see photos of subway trains that became canvas for graffiti, but you can also see other forms of street art, mostly illegal. So that's something that is very fragile because it doesn't exist for long, right? So you have to be fast in order to photograph something that appeared and that is going to be painted over soon. So this is a webpage that is it's worthwhile to have a look at it. What the city of Berlin, which is famous for providing space for street artists, does is it provides spaces where street artists can spray, where they can put on their graffitis without making themselves liable and criminal. And one of these places is Teufelsberg in Berlin, an artificially constructed little mountain or hill in the city of Berlin with an old industrial and military infrastructure that right now became a huge scene for street artists, for graffiti artists mostly, and that also was used, for example, in the film Manifesto with Kate Blanchett for the installation Manifesto, where one of the episodes is set exactly in there. So it becomes a setting of other popular culture practices, which is also something that we talk a lot in my class, how popular culture can nurture itself and can have different motives keep reappearing in it. And I also wanted to give an example of another graffiti with a painting on a wall from Teufelsberg on your right-hand side, which I thought clearly alludes to a stencil by Banksy from London, which you can see here on the left-hand side. So there are all these references at play, also in Berlin. And my last slide stems from outside of where I live. This is a telephone booth, a kind of an archaic place, but we still have these in Berlin, and this is how it looks like, and it's being tolerated by the city, and it's looked like that for months. At some point, probably parts of it will be replaced, but street art is generally, you have the impression in Berlin, very welcome, a welcomed form of expression, and the city allows for it to happen, providing particular spaces, or accepting it appearing on other spaces. So that's it for now for me. There are many other important and interesting aspects of the hip-hop culture that I did not have the time to talk about. For example, why it is so that there are mostly male artists in the scene in the US and in Germany likewise. So what happens to female rappers and why there are only so few of them. But this is a subject that we discuss explicitly and thoroughly in my class. So if you feel like taking part in it, this is a warm invitation, and you're all most welcome to join at some point. Thank you for your attention.
We hope you enjoyed this week's lecture. You can find the dates and descriptions for all sessions in our digital lecture series, as well as information about our instructors and their courses on our website. Also connect with us on social media and attend one of our informational webinars. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you again soon, online or on site here in Berlin.